life, love, and death. Since the beginning of time, these have been the three great pillars of human experience. But in the highly ordered world of ancient China, where duty to your family and honor to your ancestors were paramount, was there really room for personal love? How did you find that love? And how did you celebrate it with a wedding? Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy. I recently finished watching the Chinese drama Perfect Match, and it inspired me to make this video to talk about all the interesting traditions of ancient Chinese weddings. Today, we're exploring the complicated process of a wedding in the Song dynasty. And we're not talking about emperors and empresses. We're focusing on what weddings were really like for the common people. Before we get into the elaborate rituals and rules, we need to ask a more fundamental question. What even was marriage in the Song dynasty? The answer may be quite different from your modern idea of love and romance. Think of marriage in the Song dynasty as a business contract between two families, following traditions established in earlier dynasties such as the Han and Tang dynasties. Marriage was not a celebration of love between two individuals, but a strategic alliance designed for three purposes: to continue the family line, to combine resources and property, and to secure or improve social standing. A good marriage was like a successful business merger, strengthening both families for generations to come. On a deeper level, it was a pillar of the entire Confucian social order, an act of duty that a son or daughter owed to their parents and ancestors. So what made a marriage real and legally binding? It wasn't a piece of paper from a government office. The marriage became real through the process itself. The law recognized a union as legitimate only when it included the essential steps: the command of the parents, the formal negotiations by a matchmaker, the public exchange of betrothal gifts, and the creation of a formal written agreement between the families. This written proof, documenting the terms of the union, was treated as the official, legally binding marriage contract. These actions, witnessed by the community, created the reality of the marriage. To truly understand why this process was so rigid, we have to look at the terrifying alternative. For a modern viewer, elopement may sound romantic. For a couple in the Song dynasty, it was a disaster. Defying the system and eloping, or siben, meant facing devastating real-world consequences. First, both the men and women would be disowned and socially ruined. By eloping, they had committed a huge offense against their parents. Both families would cut them off completely. No financial help, no support if they got sick, no place to go if they fell on hard times. However, their fate were not equal. A woman's legal identity was always tied to a household. Before marriage, it was her father's household, and after a proper marriage, it became her husband's. By eloping, she existed in a state of legal limbo, belonging to no one. This meant she has zero rights. Her husband could abandon her at any moment, and she had absolutely no legal recourse. Second, their children were illegitimate. Any children they had could not legally inherit property or a family name. They were not considered to be in good standing with society, and would be barred from important advancement opportunities, such as participation in the imperial exam. And finally, perhaps the most brutal inequality was this: the men could still easily marry someone else, but the women would have a much harder time. Because the elopement wasn't a real marriage, the man was still technically a bachelor in the eyes of the law. His family could later arrange a proper, legitimate marriage for him to another woman, and his eloped partner would simply be cast aside. Having left her own family improperly, it would be extremely difficult for her to be accepted into another respectable household, leaving her with no future and no way out. So when we talk about marriage in the Song dynasty, we're talking about a system where the stakes couldn't be higher. Following the rules meant stability, legitimacy, and legacy. Breaking them meant destroying your life and the future of your children. So how did a family go about finding a suitable match for their son or daughter? Could you just point to someone you liked and hope for the best? The short answer is no. For almost everyone, marriage was guided by a single, powerful principle: the words of the matchmaker and the command of the parents. This meant the decision rested firmly with the family elders, and their primary goal was not to find a soulmate, but a suitable alliance that would benefit the family's reputation, finances, and future generations. This is where the most important figure in the entire process comes in: the professional matchmaker, or 媒人. Think of them as part private investigator, part high-stake negotiator, and part legal witness. Their job was to do far more than just make introductions. A family would hire a matchmaker and provide them with the requirements for an in-law family. They would thoroughly vet potential families, looking into their finances, social standing, and reputation. They would discreetly inquire about the prospective bride or groom's character, health, and education. It was their job to prevent any hidden surprises down the line. As negotiators, they would shuttle back and forth between the two families, smoothing over disagreements and ensuring both sides felt honored. They were the search engine for Song Dynasty marriage. Their role was so crucial that a marriage arranged without one could be considered improper and even illegitimate. So where did love fit in? While romantic love was a popular theme in Song Dynasty poetry and stories, it was rarely the basis for marriage. For commoners, opportunities for young, unmarried men and women to meet and interact freely were extremely limited. Public festivals might offer a rare and fleeting glimpse of an attractive partner, but it would still have to be submitted to the formal process of matchmakers and parental approval. A love match without family consent was the first step on the forbidden path of elopement, a massive social scandal. And as we now know, that path didn't lead to freedom. It led to a life without legal rights, without family, and without honor. Once a matchmaker found a suitable family and both sides expressed interest, the real work began. The journey from a potential match to an official engagement was not a single event, but a formal path guided by ancient tradition known as the 3 letters and 6 rites, 三书六礼. This framework, which originated in the Zhou dynasty and became the official standard during the Tang dynasty, provided the formal guide for a proper engagement. However, while the classical traditions outlined 6 rites, by the time of the Song dynasty, the process was commonly streamlined into 4 main rites. These rites were the essential steps, while the 3 letters were the crucial documents that made them all legally binding. The process began with the first 2 rites, which often blended together in practice. The first was Na Cai, the formal proposal. This is when the groom's family, through their matchmaker, will send a formal proposal document, often called a grass post, to the bride's family to officially express their interest. This was followed by the second rite, 问名, or asking the name. This involved more than just the name. It was accomplished by exchanging detailed posts. These were the formal contracts containing the precise birth details known as the 8 characters of both the bride and groom for the fortune tellers. While these first 2 steps were distinct classical rites, by the Song dynasty, they were often blended into the first rite, Na Cai, the formal proposal. The exchange of the grass post and detail post would handle both the formal proposal and the gathering of birth details all at once. With these details exchanged, the third rite, 纳吉, announcing the auspicious result, could take place. This happened after fortune tellers analyzed the couple's 8 characters by performing complex calculations to ensure the couple's elemental signs under Chinese cosmology were in harmony. Once they confirmed the match was a favorable one, the good news was formally delivered. This was often the point where the groom's family had the option for a formal viewing of the prospective bride. This was not a friendly meeting or date. It was a carefully managed and distant inspection, often arranged at a temple or restaurant where the groom or his female relatives could observe the young woman from afar. There would be no personal interaction, as the goal was instead to note her posture and public demeanor and confirm that there were no obvious physical issues. After this viewing, the final decision was sealed with a symbol. A gold hairpin from the groom's family meant yes, while a colored ribbon signaled a polite refusal. This formal, arranged meeting for the purpose of evaluating a potential spouse is the distinct ancestor of a modern concept that some of you may be familiar with today, the blind date. or 相亲. However, unlike a modern 相亲, where the couple might talk and get to know each other, the Song Dynasty version was a one-way inspection, focused on appearance and public behavior rather than personal connection. The fourth and most elaborate rite was 纳珍, presenting the betrothal gifts. The groom's family would start this rite with a public delivery of engagement wine. This was a grand parade to the bride's home, carrying decorated wine jars and delivering the first two of the three letters. These were the betrothal letter, the official engagement contract from the groom's family, and the gift letter, a detailed inventory of all the gifts they were presenting. This was followed by the actual betrothal gifts, or 聘礼, which were presented to the bride's family. As a continuation of Tang custom, this definitive act legally sealed the engagement. The betrothal gifts, which could be anything from bolts of cloth for commoners to opulent jewelry for the rich, went directly to the bride's parents and was considered compensation for the expense of raising their daughter. In response to the groom's betrothal gifts, the bride's family would prepare her dowry. This was not a gift to the groom's family, but rather the property the bride brought with her into the marriage. It was legally considered her personal property. The quality of this dowry could impact the bride's status and financial independence within her new home. You may have seen in Chinese dramas where the husband's family could take the dowry to use for themselves, but this was actually very uncommon and illegal. This stage also included the notification to the ancestors. This was a solemn ritual where both families would go to their respective ancestral altars, burn incense, and formally announce the union to their ancestors, asking for their blessing and officially informing them of the new alliance. Afterwards, the bride's family would send symbolic return gifts to show their generosity and acceptance. After the gifts were settled, the fifth rite was 请期, requesting the date. The groom's family would consult the calendar and propose an auspicious wedding date, which the bride's family would then approve. While presenting the betrothal gifts and requesting the date were two separate ancient rites. In Song Dynasty practice, they were often combined into the rite of 纳珍, presenting the betrothal gifts. The negotiation over the wedding date would typically happen during the same period as the main betrothal gifts exchange, making it all part of one large comprehensive procedure. With the date set and all the engagement rituals complete, the stage was set for the final rite, 亲迎, welcoming the bride in person. This is on the wedding day itself, and where the third and final letter would be presented. But what if, after all these intricate steps, after the gifts were exchanged and the date was set, something went wrong? What if one family wanted to back out? This would not be a simple breakup. It would require a formal legal procedure known as 退婚, which means to cancel the wedding. This was the official breaking of the contract that was formed by the acceptance of the betrothal gifts. Following legal traditions established in the Tang Dynasty, a 退婚 could only happen in two ways, either with the mutual consent of both families, or if one side had legally valid grounds to break the contract. Acceptable reasons included discovering a serious illness or that a crime had been committed by the other family. Simply getting a better marriage offer was not a legal reason and was a punishable offense. The process itself depended on the return of the betrothal gifts in order to formally void the engagement contract. If either family refused this, the matter could be taken to a local magistrate. Regardless of the reason, 退婚 brought immense public shame upon both families. But unfortunately, as always, the consequences were not equal. For the man, it was a stain on his reputation, but one he could often recover from and still find another match. For the woman, it was often a lifelong scar that made it incredibly difficult for her to secure another good marriage. With these hurdles and restrictions, an engagement in the Song Dynasty was a serious affair and not one that was to be made or broken easily. With the engagement legally sealed and a date set, the families turned their full attention to the final rite, 亲迎, the groom personally welcoming his bride. According to details from the famous guidebook, Family Rituals, written by the scholar Zhu Xi, it was a day packed with symbolism and ritual, designed to formally transfer the bride from her father's household to her husband's. and to display the new family alliance to the entire community. The groom would travel to the bride's home at the head of a parade. Interestingly, official rules from the family rituals dictate that music at a wedding was inappropriate. However, other historical accounts from the Song dynasty suggest that most wedding processions actually involved many musicians and even singers. Upon arrival at the bride's household, the groom's party would present the last of the 3 letters to the bride's family, the wedding letter. This letter was a formal request to receive, serving as the official notice that the groom had arrived to welcome his bride and that the wedding day could now officially begin. The bride, dressed in her elaborate wedding attire, would then prepare for her journey. Her face had to be completely concealed, a crucial custom ensuring the groom would not see her until the final rituals in the bridal chamber. This was often done with a red silk veil, but her face could also be shielded with a fan known as 团扇. With her face hidden, she would enter an ornate sedan chair known as 花轿. She would then be carried in the 花轿 to the groom's household, along with the great parade that came to receive her. And here's what's interesting. The bride's parents were generally not present for the main ceremony at the groom's house. This was because the wedding was seen as a formal transfer of the bride from her family's lineage to her new husband. While there generally were festivities at the bride's house before she left, her parents' official duties concluded once she departed. The bride's entry into the groom's household was a path of pure ritual. She would walk across green carpets to avoid touching the bare earth, be guided by a female attendant holding a mirror to ward off evil, and most importantly, step over a horse saddle. This was a pun, as the word for saddle, an, sounds the same as the word for peace, an, symbolizing the peaceful future. Once inside, the couple would be symbolically tied together by holding onto a long silk ribbon, often decorated with a special one-heart knot, to show their hearts were now one. This was known as 千金, or leading by the ribbon. Holding this ribbon, they would be led to the family's altar for the main event. Now, the core ceremony would take place. The 3 bows, 三拜, in front of the family altar and all the assembled relatives. The couple performed their 3 bows together. Their first bow was to heaven and earth, a deep show of respect to the cosmic order that governed their lives. Next, they would turn to the groom's family altar for the second bow, the bow to the parents and ancestors. This was a profound act of honoring your family. If the groom's parents were present, the bow was directed to them. If they were deceased, the couple would bow directly to the groom's ancestors, through the form of ancestral tablets. And finally, for their third bow, the bride and groom would turn to face one another. This was the bow to each other, the moment they formally and publicly recognize each other as husband and wife. After the 3 bows were complete in the main hall, a grand wedding feast would begin for the guests, and the groom would join the feast first, while the bride was escorted to the bridal chamber to wait. After the feast, the groom would then join the bride in the bridal chamber for more private rituals. However, according to other historical accounts from the Song dynasty, like the Dreams of Splendor of the Eastern Capital, the couple would actually perform the final bow to each other in the bridal chamber and complete the remaining private rituals before the groom joins the wedding feast. Now, what private rituals are we talking about? First, there is the unveiling ritual. This was often the first time the couple would clearly have seen each other's face, as the groom lifted the bridal's veil or set aside her fan. Then there is the 撒帐, or scattering the curtains ceremony. An officiant would toss auspicious items like fruits and coins onto the bed while chanting blessings, a ritual believed to give the couple fertility and good fortune. Lastly, there is the intimate rite of union known as 合景. This was the symbolic sharing of wine from 2 cups that were tied together, signifying that they were now one. The wedding rituals then extended beyond the wedding day. On the second day, the new wife was formally presented to her new parents-in-law to pay her respect as a new member of the family. This event was known as 拜舅姑, or respecting the in-laws. As a part of this tradition, she would perform one of her first duties as a wife, cooking a meal and personally serving her new elders. This act served as a formal demonstration of her new role as a respectful daughter-in-law and symbolized her official integration into her husband's household. On the third day, the new couple would make a formal journey back to the bride's childhood home. This was known as 归宁, or third date visit. This was a grand affair where the groom was formally introduced to his parents-in-law as their new son. The 归宁 was their first official welcome to their new son-in-law, and the bride's first return home as an honored guest, instead of a daughter. In addition, on a favorable day, shortly after the wedding, a ritual was performed known as 庙见, or the temple visit. On this day, she was formally presented before the husband's family ancestral altar. It was only after this formal presentation to the ancestors that the wedding process was considered truly complete. Now that the couple is married, let's talk about the structure of the household itself, specifically the topic of multiple partners. The Song dynasty legal and social structure was crystal clear on one point. A man could only have one official principal wife. This woman was his 妻. She was the legal matriarch of the household, married into the family through the full 3 letters and 6 rights. Her children were the primary heirs, and she alone was considered the mother of the lineage. With that said, traditions established from the Tang dynasty did allow a man to form legal, long-term intimate relationships with other women, who were known as 妾, or concubines. The process of taking a concubine, known as 纳妾, was starkly different from marrying a wife and highlighted the woman's lower status. The complex 3 letters and 6 rights were completely bypassed. There was no formal matchmaker, no grand procession, and no elaborate exchange of gifts between equal families. Instead, it was often a private transaction. A concubine might be purchased from a poorer family, be a household servant who was elevated in status, or even be received as a gift. A simple payment, sometimes called body money, 身价银, was often made to her family or previous owner, sealing the transfer. She would then enter the household discreetly, often through a side door, a powerful symbol that she was not a new matriarch, but a new possession of the household. But who would actually take a concubine? For the vast majority of commoners, this was a complete non-issue. Supporting even one wife and family was a struggle. The practice of taking concubines was almost exclusively reserved for the wealthiest and most powerful members of society, high-ranking scholar officials, and extremely successful merchants. For this elite group, there was one primary and socially acceptable reason to take a concubine: to ensure the continuation of the family line. If the principal wife was unable to bear a son after many years, it was considered a man's duty to his ancestors to bring a concubine into the household for the specific purpose of producing a male heir. While some wealthy men undoubtedly took concubines for pleasure, the need for a son was the justification that society would accept. This system created a strict and lifelong hierarchy between the children. The children born to the principal wife were known as 嫡子, the mainline heirs. They were entitled to the family's primary name, titles, and the bulk of its inheritance. The children born to a concubine were known as 庶子. While they were legitimate and part of the family, their social standing and claim to the inheritance were significantly lower than their 嫡子, half-siblings. However, if the principal wife had no sons, the 庶子 would become the primary heir, responsible for inheriting the family's property and continuing the ancestral line. His social status as the son of a concubine would remain, but his role as the sole male heir would take precedence. To reinforce this hierarchy, one crucial rule was enforced. All children, regardless of who gave birth to them, had to call the principal wife mother, 母亲. She was the mother of the lineage. A concubine's child would address their own birth mother with a different title, such as 姨娘, which translates loosely to auntie mother. This rule powerfully demonstrated that all children belonged not to their individual birth mothers, but to the main family line, headed by the one and only official wife. Was the man always the head of the household? Not always. There was one fascinating exception to these patriarchal rules: a practice known as 入赘, where a man would marry into his wife's family. This typically happened when a wealthy family had daughters but no sons to carry on the family name. To prevent their lineage from dying out, they would recruit a son-in-law to live with them and act as an heir. In this role reversal, the entire wedding process was flipped. The groom's family provided no major betrothal gifts. Instead, the bride's family covered the costs. The groom would move into his wife's home, and the marriage contract would often require their children to take the mother's surname. But this arrangement came at a great social cost for the man. He was known as a 赘婿, a title that implied he had been pawned. He was often looked down upon in society for abandoning his own ancestral line, and his status within his new family was significantly lower than that of a typical husband. But why would a man agree to this arrangement? The reason were almost always rooted in poor economic circumstances. The man may be from an impoverished family or suffering from the burden of debt. It was also sometimes an option for men who had no land to inherit or no hope for career advancement. A 入赘 marriage offered a life free from poverty. It was a trade of his social status and autonomy for economic security. It was a difficult choice, but for some, it was the only practical one. We've seen the immense effort required to forge a marital contract, and we've already discussed the dire consequences of breaking an engagement. But what happened if the contract to be broken was the marriage itself? Divorce was legal in the Song dynasty, but it was a complex process. There were two main forms of divorce. The most common grounds for divorce were dictated by the state and known as the 7 outs, 七出. These were 7 conditions under which a husband could unilaterally divorce his wife. They included failing to have a son, adultery, disrespect to his parents, theft, jealousy, suffering from a serious disease, and talking too much. Yep, you heard that right, talking too much. However, the law also provided the 3 exceptions, 三不去, which protected a wife from being divorced under 3 situations. First, she could not be divorced if she had completed the full 3-year mourning period for her husband's parents. Second, if her own parents' home no longer existed for her to return to. Lastly, if the family had been poor when they married but has since become rich. That third exception is fascinating from a modern perspective. It legally recognized that wealth built during a marriage is a shared asset, ensuring she couldn't be cast aside after years of shared struggle. A less common, more dignified path was 和离, or divorce by mutual consent, where both parties agreed to separate. If both husband and wife agreed to separate, they could draw up a formal document, effectively a divorce agreement, and end the marriage without needing to cite one of the 7 outs. In reality, any form of divorce brought great social shame, and this, again, was especially true for the women, who would find it very difficult to remarry. But what about becoming a widow? This was a completely different situation. For a widowed man, the outcome was more similar to a divorced man. While losing a spouse was difficult, he could usually find a new partner and arrange for another marriage. For a woman, however, becoming a widow in the Song dynasty placed her in an honored but difficult position. With the rise of Neo-Confucianism, there was immense social pressure for a widow to remain chaste for the rest of her life, serving her in-laws and raising her children. A chaste widow was seen as the ultimate model of female virtue and could bring great prestige to her deceased husband's family. If she was the mother of the new male heir, she could even wield considerable power as the family matriarch. But could a widow remarry? Despite the social praise for chastity, widow remarriage was legal and very common, especially among commoners who could not afford to support a non-working relative. However, the process was slightly different from her first marriage. The authority to arrange her remarriage shifted from her own parents to the family of her deceased husband. Her in-laws now control her future. They would be the ones to negotiate with a new groom's family and receive the betrothal gifts. A widow was legally entitled to take her original dowry with her, but this could lead to bitter disputes with her in-laws. The ceremony itself was also a simpler, less joyous affair. Her remarriage was seen as a practical arrangement, not a new beginning. Ultimately, the different fates of a widow and a divorcee revealed Song dynasty's highest priority, the stability and honor of the family unit. The rules created a rigid social hierarchy and leveraged the marriage system to ensure the continuation of ancient China's concept of family. And so, from the intricate steps of the 3 letters and 6 rites to the stark reality of divorce and widowhood, it's clear that marriage in the Song dynasty was far more than a personal choice. It was the central pillar of society, a binding legal contract, a display of family status, and a sacred duty to one's ancestors. Which of these Song dynasty marriage customs do you find most surprising or different from today? What do you think about love versus arranged marriage? What would you do when faced with the choice of family or self? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support this channel and help me uncover more fascinating stories from Chinese history, please check out my membership and become a Noble Baobab. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Stay curious, stay magical.